Hi everybody, welcome to week 10. This week we are going to be addressing social problems pertaining to the LGBT plus community. So social problems such as homophobia and transphobia. And if those are terms that you're not familiar with, don't worry, we're going to introduce them in this week's content, and then take a closer look sociologically about how systems of inequality serve to disadvantaged not only women and gender minorities in our society, but also sexual minorities as well. So let me just minimize my floating head here and introduce you to the different pieces of content we're going to be covering this week. So a lot of the social problems we're addressing this week are systems of discrimination and oppression that target members of the LGBT plus community. Maybe you are familiar with some of the terms or the identities that are represented by the LGBT plus community. For some of you, this may be your first introduction to this acronym or these identities in general, and there are a lot of them, and they are increasing in number each and every year. So this first reading is just kind of a descriptive piece that defines what these different identity labels mean and who they pertain to. Some people find it difficult to keep track of all of these, and I understand that because it does increase, like I said, every year. It seems like we're developing new terminology and new definitions to represent people of different gender and sexual identities. But since identity is a very intrinsic part of who we are as individuals, it really shapes our sense of self and how we make sense of the world. It is important to have an understanding of what these identities labels mean, because we never want to misidentify an individual. It can be kind of a dehumanizing experience when we do that. So this first reading, like I said, just kind of provides some definitions for what these identities mean and who they represent. This next reading comes out of our textbook on social problems, explaining kind of the sociological background or foundation, if you will, of social problems pertaining specifically to sexuality or sexual orientation. I then include a piece that I wrote that addresses kind of the history of same-gender marriage and the path to legalization in the United States. And I use a term called heteronormativity, which is a sociological term that explains how being heterosexual is built within the structures of our societies to privilege individuals who identify as heterosexual at the expense of marginalizing or oppressing individuals who are attracted to folks of same gender, etc. So hopefully this piece will kind of connect these dots about how being heterosexual is a privileged identity in our society, and how being gay or lesbian or any sexual identity where you're experiencing attraction to members of the same gender as you can result in stigmatization and structural oppression. These next two readings are privilege checklists. So we've done something similar to these in previous weeks, kind of unpacking privileges. If you remember the reading we covered from Peggy McIntosh, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, she lists a lot of different behaviors that white people often take for granted as privileges of having white skin. These are similar checklists, but they have to do with the privileges of being heterosexual, so identifying as someone who is attracted to people of the opposite gender, and also cisgender, which is probably going to be a new term for many of you, but cisgender refers to individuals who identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. So kind of understanding cisgender being opposite of transgender, which refers to individuals who do not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. And again, these terms will be introduced in the content this week, so don't panic if you're completely unfamiliar with any of this language. I then include another feature-length documentary film. This one is called The Gender Revolution. It was narrated and moderated by let me pull it up here, by Katie Couric on National Geographic, and it's an hour and 30 minutes, so it is a full-length film, so please plan accordingly, but it is very informative. Students always comment about how much they learn from watching this documentary, and it shows you kind of an inside look of the lived experiences of several different members of the LGBT plus community, from trans to intersex, which again is another term that you may be unfamiliar with. And I think it's always a great idea to try and understand the humanized context of these different identities. Whenever we're studying a social problem that affects specifically a group of people that maybe you don't identify with, it's always a really powerful experience to hear firsthand what it's like to live as a part of that marginalized community, and to understand how the social problems affecting that specific community affect people, affect other human beings in our society. So it's a really informative documentary. I hope you really get something out of that. Oops, let me back up here. And the next piece is just a short blurb on intersex, which is a concept that will be introduced in the Gender Revolution documentary, but this just provides a little more information about what intersex is and how intersex folks are unfairly treated in our society. And then this is another reading here written by a sociologist who is an expert on research pertaining to intersex individuals and kind of unpacking social problems that occur in the medical institution in the United States. And then, of course, I have a brief lecture video this week where, again, I just kind of summarize some of the main terminology that's introduced in this week's content and the slides for that as well. So, as always, I hope you enjoy this content. If you have any questions or any conversations that you'd like to have that are sparked by your curiosity as you're reading through this content, always feel free to visit me during my WebEx office hours or send me an email. All right, take care, everybody. I hope you have a great week.